She didn't expect much when she handed over $5,000 for a crumbling hotel in the middle of nowhere, just a patch of land, maybe a roof to fix. But the moment Riley Monroe stepped inside, something felt off. It wasn't just the silence, it was the way it listened. 3 weeks later, she would climb the penthouse stairs and discover a secret sealed away for nearly 60 years, a forgotten blueprint, a missing name, and a fortune hidden behind drywall. What began as a mechanic's gamble would soon ignite a nationwide frenzy. Before we climb the stairs, let us know where you're watching from, and if stories like this make you believe in second chances and buried legacies, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's discovery is even wilder than today's. Riley Monroe didn't blink when the gavel dropped. Sold lot 14, Oak Ridge Hotel, $5,000 even. No one else had bid. The courthouse room was quiet, save for the rustle of paperwork and the whisper of someone asking why in the world anyone would buy that place. The Oak Ridge had been abandoned since the early 82nds, a brick and plaster skeleton rising from the prairie, 30 minutes past the last gas station and a full hour from any town that still had a working movie theater. But Riley had her reasons. Her father used to tell her that every machine, no matter how busted, held a secret worth unlocking. And buildings? They were just machines made of wood, pipe, and wire. If it had bones, she could make it breathe again. She drove out to the site that same afternoon. Toolbox in the bed of her faded blue pickup, boots dusted from the shop floor, and a knot of something between fear and excitement tightening behind her ribs. The Oak Ridge stood 3 stories tall, its paint blistered off in patches of sun-faded coral and powder blue. Ivy strangled its left side, like it was trying to pull the whole place underground. The windows, most of them broken or boarded up, looked like hollow eyes watching the prairie breathe. Riley stood across the 2-lane road for a full minute, staring up at it, hands on her hips, trying to imagine what it once looked like when the lights were on, when guests pulled up in Cadillacs and couples slow danced behind velvet drapes. Then she grabbed her lunchbox, crossed the road, and stepped up the creaking porch steps like she was meeting someone who'd been waiting a long time. The air inside was heavy with dust and forgotten decades. She flicked on her flashlight. The hallway stretched ahead, wallpaper peeling in long vertical ribbons, plaster cracked like dried riverbeds. Floorboards moaned under her boots. She moved slowly, checking the structure load-bearing walls, foundational shifts, sagging ceilings. It was bad, but not hopeless. Most people would call it a teardown. She saw something else, a challenge, a canvas, a damn good story waiting to be written in sawdust and solder. She wandered from room to room, each one more neglected than the last dining hall with overturned chairs, kitchen with rusted stoves, bedrooms still holding mattresses like broken teeth. But the weirdest thing wasn't the decay. It was how sealed everything still felt. Most abandoned buildings had evidence of squatters, looters, party kids with spray paint cans. Not this one. No graffiti, no trash, no vandalism. Just silence. It was like the building had been forgotten on purpose, not by time, but by someone who didn't want it remembered. And then she saw it. The elevator shaft at the end of the main hallway, old-school brass door, padlocked shut, no call buttons, no power cables leading into it. Just a sign overhead in gold-leafed lettering, Penthouse, staff restricted. Riley felt her pulse skip. She didn't come here looking for secrets, but one had just looked back. The next morning, Riley came back with more than just a flashlight. Her old backpack thumped with a crowbar, gloves, a basic circuit tester, and 2 energy bars she barely remembered packing. The sun was already high by the time she pushed open the front door again, dust motes swirling in the hot, stagnant air like ghosts too tired to leave. She made her way down the hallway slowly, boots scuffing across the floor as she passed each door. It was only when she reached the end again, standing face to face with that silent brass elevator, that she realized how strange the whole place really was. The air around it felt colder, like it had its own microclimate, a little pocket of time left on pause. The padlock was newer than everything else, Stainless steel, no rust, barely scratched like it had been placed there long after the hotel had shut down. Riley knelt, studied the way the chain wound through the handles, then stood up and traced the doorframe with her fingertips. She knocked twice, listening. Solid, but not dead. Hollow behind it. The kind of hollow that echoed. She stepped back and took in the ceiling. No dust above the elevator. No cobwebs. That alone made her pause. The whole building was a tomb, but this had been touched recently. She opened her backpack and pulled out a little notepad she used for engine sketches and brake diagrams, flipping to a blank page and jotting down a single word. Clean. She turned and started checking the walls along the hallway, looking for fuse boxes or hidden switches. What she found instead was a framed black and white photo halfway down the corridor. A grand opening portrait. Ribbon-cutting ceremony, mayor shaking hands, a crowd of well-dressed men and women with cocktails in hand. In the back corner of the photo was a tall woman in a bellhop uniform, expression unreadable, standing just to the left of the elevator. No name, no plaque, just her eyes staring directly at the camera like she knew it would be found one day. Riley gently took the frame off the wall, flipped it over. Nothing written. The nails holding it in place weren't even rusted. She replaced it and moved on, her mind racing. Buildings tell stories in fragments, scratches on floors, nails that don't match, pipes that hum without permission. And the Oak Ridge was humming. She could feel it in her bones. Back in the dining room, she took a break, sitting on a stool that looked ready to collapse. She took a bite of the energy bar, chewing in silence, until she noticed something about the back wall. A large rectangular section of wallpaper had peeled off, but underneath wasn't plaster. It was metal, riveted, reinforced. A wall where there shouldn't have been one. No windows, no seams, just a blank steel plate flush with the rest of the hotel. She got up slowly. Something was behind it. She could feel it. By noon the next day, Riley had pried away enough wallpaper to reveal the full width of the hidden panel. It wasn't a decorative feature. It was a wall, solid steel, riveted into the surrounding structure, not original to the hotel's 1,920 seconds bones. She tapped around its edges, hoping for a hollow echo, but it sounded like it had been welded in place. Whatever was behind it hadn't seen daylight in decades. She stared at it for a long time before finally backing away. If there was one thing her father taught her, it was that when you hit a wall, the building usually offers a different route. You just have to listen closely. She returned to the second floor, this time with a plan to start mapping out every inch. The layout was simple enough. 3 main floors, a basement, and supposedly the penthouse suite at the top. But the stairwells didn't go past the 3rd floor. No visible access, no ladders, no roof hatch. It was as if the penthouse existed only in the building's marketing materials, not in its actual design. She climbed the final step of the 3rd floor stairwell and stood beneath the ceiling, eyes locked on the dusty light fixture above. That's when the floor creaked behind her. She turned fast, nothing, just an empty hallway full of sunlight and rot. She exhaled, turned back, and noticed something else. A narrow crack in the floorboards, just before the threshold into room 309. She crouched and ran her fingers along it, then reached for her screwdriver. The boards were warped, but not nailed. With a little pressure, one lifted. Beneath it was a hollowed-out pocket, maybe an old maintenance channel, long sealed up. And inside that cavity, wrapped in wax paper and twine, was a bundle of envelopes. Riley pulled them out carefully, setting them in her lap. The paper was yellowed, but intact, each envelope addressed in the same looping script. No return address, no stamp. Just 1 letter per page, each one dated, the earliest from 1954, the latest from 1961, and all signed the same way. Simply, M. She read the first one aloud, her voice low in the still hallway. To whoever finds this, know that not everything left behind was meant to be forgotten. They say the Oak Ridge closed because of mold. That's a lie. The real reason sleeps above you, sealed tight. The room was never meant to be opened again. But if you're reading this, maybe it already has been. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the next letter, then the one after that. The same voice, calm but urgent, like someone whispering through the decades. She didn't know who M was, but they hadn't written these for fun. They were warnings, and every warning pointed up to the penthouse. Riley folded the stack gently, tucked them into her pack, and stood. She had just gone from restorer to investigator, and she wasn't turning back now. The 5th day was when everything started to shift. Riley returned with a new set of tools, a multimeter, a fresh crowbar, and a thermal imaging camera she'd borrowed from an old friend at the salvage yard. If there was a way into that penthouse, it wasn't through the obvious. Not anymore. The stairwell hatch had a 6-digit keypad with no manufacturer logo, and the metal casing felt too heavy for something simple. She aimed the thermal lens at the wall behind it, and there it was. Faint heat traces, low-level power still feeding the lock from somewhere in the building. That meant 2 things. First, there was a generator or live circuit line still functioning after all these years. And second, someone had intended for this system to be accessed again, someday. She spent hours tracing power lines, crawling through the crawl spaces and ductwork like a rat with a wrench. And just when she was ready to give up, she found it in a closet on the 2nd floor. The wall had been painted over a dozen times, but one corner gave away too easily when she knocked. Behind it, folded and sealed in a plastic sleeve, was a full set of blueprints for the Oak Ridge Hotel. But these weren't standard building plans. These were classified style documents stamped "Restricted, Property of NCL," and dated June 1962. She'd never heard of NCL before. Not a company name, no phone number, just initials. She spread them out on the lobby floor, flashlight balancing against a coffee can. The first few pages showed the original hotel design, elegant, ornate, almost theatrical in style. But halfway through, everything changed. A new series of diagrams had been laid over the originals, showing additions, reinforcements, rerouted wiring, and an entirely new structure. A vault space built directly above the penthouse ceiling. Labeled simply, Room 19X. No windows, no door to the outside, no elevator shaft reaching it. Only one access point noted, through the sealed stairwell Riley had already found. She sat back, stunned. The hotel wasn't just renovated, it had been weaponized. Someone, at some point in the early 60s, had turned the top of this abandoned resort into a private fortress, and whatever was in room 19X, it wasn't meant for guests. As the last light faded through the lobby windows, Riley carefully refolded the plans and placed them in her pack. She felt like she had just picked up a trail that had been cold for 60 years. But it wasn't cold anymore. It was waking up, and it wanted to be found. She looked around the hotel again, not just at the walls or fixtures, but at the silence itself. This wasn't just about mystery anymore. It was about motive. Why had someone gone to such lengths to hide a room that didn't officially exist? And why did the whole building feel like it was waiting for someone like her to ask? Riley barely slept that night. Her thoughts were tangled up in blueprints and initials, in heat signatures and handwritten letters. When she finally drifted off at dawn, her dreams were a patchwork of locked doors and flickering lights. By midday, she was back at the Oak Ridge, but this time with a new angle. She'd brought her laptop, a portable hotspot, and a deep-dive mindset. If NCL wasn't a company, maybe it was a person. And if Room 19X had anything to do with the Cold War-style tech she'd seen, there had to be records somewhere. She sat cross-legged on the hotel's front steps, sifting through declassified databases, local archives, and digitized newspapers from the 50 seconds and 60 seconds. Most of it was noise. Then, just when she was about to give up, something clicked. A 1963 clipping from the Oak Ridge Sentinel, barely scanned, water-damaged but clear enough to read a headline. Hotel acquired by defense consultant following mysterious fire. The article was short, but one name stood out like it had been waiting. Nathaniel C. Langston. Initials N.C.L. Riley's heart kicked up a notch. She dug deeper. Langston wasn't a hotelier. He was a defense engineer, a quiet one, rarely photographed, who'd worked under various shell corporations linked to DARPA, the Department of Defense, and an energy consortium that no longer existed. He'd filed a patent in 1961 for something called an Independent Energy Resonance Core, but the patent had been pulled before approval, citing national security conflict. A year later, he bought the Oak Ridge Hotel under a private trust, and then vanished. No death certificate, no obituary, no property transfer, just silence. Back inside the hotel, Riley paced the lobby like it was speaking a new language now. The brass elevator, the sealed stairwell, the vault room labeled 19X, it all lined up. Langston hadn't just bought the Oak Ridge to hide. He'd built something here. Something powerful enough to be erased from public records. She returned to the third floor and stared at the elevator again. The same hum still vibrated faintly behind the door. Not mechanical, electrical, alive. Then she noticed something she hadn't before. A small gap beneath the elevator's lower trim. She dropped to the floor and peered inside. Wires not frayed or rusted, but still taut, clean, shielded in black polymer insulation. They snaked along the baseboard and disappeared into the wall. She followed them room by room until she ended up in 311, a former suite now gutted to the studs. Behind the closet wall, she found what looked like a breaker box, but smaller, sealed with a 3-digit code dial and a blinking red light. Whatever Langston had built, it wasn't finished. Or worse, it was finished, and still running. She sat on the edge of the window, staring out at the overgrown parking lot below. The wind picked up, rustling dead leaves across the asphalt. She didn't know where this was headed anymore. But she knew one thing. The man who disappeared had left a trail, and she was standing right in the middle of it. The storm rolled in fast. Thick clouds bled across the horizon as Riley unrolled the old blueprints across the penthouse stairwell landing. Her eyes scanned the scrawled notes again. Langston's annotations were precise, mathematical, and almost poetic in places. One phrase was repeated 3 times in the margins. Activation, only during atmospheric charge. She didn't know what it meant, not exactly, but when the first bolt of lightning cracked across the prairie sky that night, she started to understand. The air inside the Oak Ridge changed. Static prickled against her arms, and every hair on the back of her neck stood up like something ancient had just stirred. The lights long dead didn't flicker on, but somewhere in the walls, something came to life. A low hum vibrated through the structure. Not mechanical, resonant, as if the building itself had taken a breath after decades underwater. She stood frozen, hand still on the blueprint, listening. The hum wasn't steady. It pulsed. A rhythm, like a heartbeat, slow and deep, layered beneath the sound of rain hammering the windows. She stepped lightly down the hall, following the vibration, past the elevator, past the sealed breaker panel in room 311, and into the dining room, now completely dark, except for the faint glow coming from the seams of that strange steel wall. The hidden vault was lighting up. She approached slowly, boots soft on the water-warped floor. As she reached out to touch the metal, the light faded. Gone, as fast as it had come. But the message was clear. Langston had built something that responded to the weather, or maybe it was more than that. Maybe it needed the storm. The charge. The energy of nature itself to unlock whatever it was holding. Riley sat in the corner for hours, waiting for the hum to return, watching for flickers in the circuitry. But the building remained quiet. The rain softened, the wind died down, and the electricity in the air slowly faded like a song ending on a single note. Whatever had awakened was now asleep again. But not for long. The next morning, she returned to the breaker box in 311. This time, she brought gloves, a voltmeter, and a little more courage. She placed the probes on the contacts, 6.7 volts. Not enough to power anything serious, but it was alive, and that meant it had a source. Buried, hidden, protected, possibly beneath the floorboards, possibly above the penthouse ceiling, possibly both. She took the brass penthouse key out of her pocket and stared at it. It had to open something. The physical door was sealed with electronic locks, but somewhere inside this building there had to be a manual backup, a fail-safe. A way in that didn't rely on power or passwords. That's when she remembered the painting in the hallway, the woman in the bellhop uniform. In the grand opening photo, she'd been standing to the left of the elevator. Always watching, always waiting. Riley stood, grabbed her flashlight, and turned toward the portrait. If Langston left a way in, maybe he didn't leave it in the walls. Maybe he left it in plain sight. The portrait had always unsettled her, but now Riley stared at it like it held instructions. The woman in the bellhop uniform, M, she was sure of it, now had been placed deliberately. The line of her eyes, the tilt of her hand resting on the elevator's call panel, the tiny triangle of shadow near her hip. Riley ran her fingers across the painting's surface and felt the faintest ridge in the lower frame. It wasn't random brush texture. It was a latch. She slipped her screwdriver underneath and pried gently. The painting popped forward with a soft click, swinging open like a cabinet. Behind it was a narrow recess in the wall, and inside, a second brass key. This one had no tag, just the number 19X etched into the side. Riley held it in her palm, breath caught in her throat. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She whispered under her breath, "You left a trail. Just like you said you would." She wasted no time. With both keys in her pocket, she returned to the stairwell and climbed to the sealed hatch. The keypad still blinked red, taunting her, but now she had something it didn't expect, a keyhole, hidden beneath a rusted decorative plate near the floor. Riley pried the cover off, revealing a hidden cylinder lock. She slid the 19X key in. It fit, and turned with a satisfying click. The keypad screen went dark. A mechanical thunk echoed through the walls, followed by a groaning hiss as internal bolts disengaged. The hatch door creaked open, revealing a short, narrow corridor lit by pale amber emergency lights. Dust hung in the air like fog. Riley stepped inside. The corridor led to a set of steel doors that looked like they belonged in a fallout shelter. She took a breath, pressed her hand against the cold handle, and pulled. The door groaned open, and for a moment she saw nothing, just shadows and shapes. Then her flashlight beam caught the gleam of metal and glass. The room inside was like nothing else in the Oak Ridge. Sterile, geometric, humming faintly with power. A vault without treasure. A lab without labels. In the center stood a pedestal, and atop it, a locked glass case. Inside that case were three things. A folder marked Langston Confidential, a schematic roll labeled R-type energy node, and a small silver cube, etched with circuit-like patterns and softly pulsing with blue light. Riley took a step forward, the air thick and dry, the sound of her boots swallowed by carpet-lined walls. The room had no windows, no vents, no indication of how power was still flowing. But something about the silence told her this place wasn't dormant, it was watching, preserved, waiting for the right hands to return. She stood frozen, hands shaking, every part of her yelling to back out and run. But she didn't. She walked toward the glass case, reached into her bag, and pulled out her grandfather's multi-tool. It was time to see what Nathaniel Langston had locked away, and why no one ever wanted it found. The lock on the case was primitive, a simple spring latch beneath the glass. Riley slid the multi-tool under the edge, twisted, and felt the mechanism give way with a snap. The lid lifted with a slow creak, and for a moment the room felt heavier, like the act of opening it had shifted something in the air. She reached in and picked up the folder first, her hands trembling. The paper inside was aged but pristine, sealed in an archival sleeve. The first page was a cover sheet. Confidential. Project Umbra. Property of NCL. Beneath that, a handwritten note in faded black ink. If you're reading this, I'm either long gone, or I've decided the world is finally ready. She flipped through the pages. They were blueprints, schematics for something called a resonant energy core, unlike anything she'd seen. Not fossil fuel-based, not nuclear. A system designed to pull raw kinetic energy from atmospheric shifts, storms, vibrations, even human movement. A self-sustaining generator that could power an entire building off the hum of existence. It was wild. Impossible. Except she'd felt it. That night during the storm, when the walls vibrated and the vault glowed. It hadn't been in her head. It had been Langston's invention, waking up. She turned to the schematic roll and unfurled it across the floor. The core itself had been designed in modular segments, with a control interface that could regulate temperature and load balancing without any centralized grid. Riley couldn't fully comprehend the math, but she could read the annotations. Field tested. Requires isolation. Unstable at full output. Then she picked up the cube. It was heavier than it looked. The metal cold, its surface humming softly. On the underside was a serial number, and below that, an embossed plaque. Prototype R0. Do not duplicate. She sat down hard on the floor, back against the wall, cube in her lap. Her mind was spinning. If this was real, and everything around her suggested it was, then she wasn't just holding a piece of forgotten technology. She was holding a fortune. A revelation, a device that, in the right hands, could reshape the entire energy industry. She placed the cube carefully into her bag and opened the final envelope inside the folder. It was a letter, dated July 1963, written by Langston himself. I built something they feared, not because it didn't work, but because it did. They told me to shut it down. I didn't. I came here instead. If you've found this, you're either a thief or a believer. I hope it's the second. Do with it what I couldn't. Finish what I started. The bottom of the letter was signed in tight, looping pen. N.C. Langston. Riley folded the paper slowly, reverently. She stood up, heart pounding in her chest like an engine ready to redline. Outside, the wind had picked up again. The storm was returning, and the building was starting to hum. The storm hit harder this time. Thunder cracked overhead like the sky itself was tearing open, and as Riley made her way down from the vault, the walls of the Oak Ridge began to tremble in waves. But it wasn't the kind of tremble that came from rot or wind. It was rhythmic, alive. The whole building pulsed with energy, as if Langston's creation, buried, silenced, and sealed for 60 years, had been waiting for this moment to come alive again. She didn't run. She didn't hide. She walked straight down the dimly lit stairwell, the cube tucked tight in her bag, her mind already racing through what came next. The front door of the Oak Ridge groaned open under the pressure change, and outside, lightning lit up the sky in violent strobes. In the distance, a low hum echoed across the prairie. Riley stood beneath the porch overhang, soaked in adrenaline and rain, staring out at the empty world she'd just changed. Somewhere, someone would come looking for this for her. She had no doubt about that now. The patent Langston had tried to register? Buried. The blueprints? Erased. But none of it had stayed hidden. And now she held the last surviving piece of it in her hands. By sunrise, the sky had calmed. Riley returned to the penthouse one last time and shut the steel doors behind her. She placed the cube back on the pedestal, not because she was giving it up, but because she needed to understand it first. She needed time. She needed safety. And she needed to decide who, if anyone, she could trust. She sat cross-legged on the floor and stared at the blue glow inside that metal shell. A mechanic's hands weren't supposed to hold history like this. But then again, maybe that was the point. When she emerged hours later, the hotel was quiet again. No more humming, no more flickering lights, just the sound of wind through broken windows and the soft groan of old beams shifting with age. She walked through the lobby with a new kind of stillness, like someone who had just crossed through a door no one else had dared to open. At the front desk, She found an old guest log buried beneath papers. She flipped it open and scribbled one line beneath the last name written decades ago. R. Monroe, here to finish what he started. By the time she made it back to town, her phone had service again. There were voicemails from a blocked number. 2, then 5, then 11. She didn't listen. Not yet. Instead, she drove to the one person who might understand a retired engineer she used to fix up motorcycles with on weekends. The kind of man who could look at something strange and say, "Let's open it up." When he saw the cube, he just stared. "Where the hell did you get this?" Riley smiled. "Long story." He looked at her like he already knew. "You're not just a mechanic anymore, are you?" "No," she said quietly. "I'm not, and the world would never see her or that old hotel the same way again."